Morning, everyone. So today I thought I'd check out the latest polling because if you were a Tory MP, like let's assume you're a Tory MP with your head screwed on, you're just looking around, you're thinking, "Oh my goodness me," this polling would be a bit of a bitter pill because I'll put up the first one actually, and it shows Rishi Sunak how he's viewed compared to other, um, or basically every prime minister, former prime minister that's still alive. And you've got four bars here for those who can't see it clearly. The purple bar is if people think that Rishi Sunak is better than that former prime minister. So at the top, for example, they can see quite a lot do with Liz Truss. The blue bar is they think they're about the same. Do you know what? We didn't really see any difference. The grey bar is just don't know, and the orange bar is worse. So more people, like way more people, think that Rishi Sunak is at least better than Liz Truss. Although interestingly, that number has gone down compared with a year ago. Again, there's a significant number think better than Boris Johnson. Now that's interesting because a lot of Tories, like I don't just mean Boris Johnson supporters either. There are a lot of Conservatives in the media as well as in and around the party that think actually we'd have been better off keeping Boris Johnson. Now, what I would just say to that is I can see where they're coming from, but they always seem to forget the Privileges Committee. There was no way of keeping Boris Johnson because remember, I mean, he was found guilty by the Privileges Committee on multiple. And remember, I still find it hilarious. Boris Johnson was found guilty of 5 different types, not counts, 5 different types, completely different types of contempt of parliament, and he was only being investigated for 1. So he created 4 further offences during the investigation itself. That's how bad he was. So he would have, I know if he'd have still been prime minister, he could have been extra difficult about handing over a load of the documents. He would have been found guilty. He was as guilty as sin. And he still would have had the suspension recommended. You can't allow someone to still be prime minister whilst being suspended by parliament. It's absolute nonsense. So he had to go. But it's interesting that the public at large still broadly thinks Sunak is better than Johnson. And it just goes to show what I was trying to explain to Conservatives and they weren't listening about 2 years ago, that Partygate is just one of those things that people don't get over. They don't get over it because do you know what? What is really hurting people is that loved ones died alone, or they couldn't be with them, or they couldn't go to the funeral, and that doesn't blow over. But then after that, Sunak is like worse than everyone else compared to Theresa May, where people are very split on the issue. 28% think that Rishi Sunak is better, at least, than Theresa May. But that's to 30 who think it is worse. So there's slightly more of the population think that Theresa May was better than Rishi Sunak. David Cameron, way more people think that David Cameron was better than Rishi Sunak. Gordon Brown, again, way more people. Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, again, way more people. And the same with John Major. So it's like Rishi Sunak, if you're a Tory MP, you're looking at it and thinking, okay, so we made the right decision to go with Rishi Sunak compared with Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. Okay, we made the right decision there. But he is still seen as worse than every other former prime minister that is alive today. You know, so that is a bit grim. That is a bit grim for them. Now, then there's several polls here. Now, that's the one that at least lets you think, well, at least we've got the third worst prime. Remember, we've had 3 prime ministers in now, what is it, about 14 months, just under 14 months. And Rishi Sunak is considered the best of them, but it's a pretty low bar. So let's just have a look at another poll now, because this is where it's now on Rishi Sunak. Let's see if I get the right one here. Let's look at this one first. So this one is showing, so this is a year on. It's going to compare last year with this year, what people thought. And it's saying half of Britons say that Rishi Sunak has been a poor or terrible prime minister, only 11% think he's been good or great. So the question is, so from 2022 compared to 2023, do you think Rishi Sunak will be, so first of all, a great prime minister? And this is how bad it was even then. Only 3%. Last year, he'd only just been made prime minister, right? He's been prime minister for like 2 minutes. Only 3% even last year thought he'd be a great prime minister. So again, at that point, people weren't. And this is why as well, when people go on about, this grand vision, stuff like that Labour needs, it's like, no, all people want is just something to work. Because you had 3% thought he'd be a great prime minister, but you did have 22% think he'd be at least a good prime minister, and 29 an average prime minister. And even that'd be okay. Even that would be okay. Average or good, that'll do. We'll be happy with that. And now it's gone down quite badly. So now only 1% think he'll be a great prime minister, or has been a great prime minister, should we say. I'd be interested to know who that 1% are, but do bear in mind, I think there's about 3% of the country think that the earth is flat. So there's like 3 times as many people think the earth is flat as think Rishi Sunak's been a great prime minister. A good prime minister, though, has slashed from 22 to 10%. An average prime ministers have gone up. So some of the people who thought he'd be a good or a great prime minister at least think, well, he's probably about average. But the number who think poor or terrible has gone. So half the population think he has been poor or terrible, which is, again, really not bad. Isn't Thatcher dead? Oh, yeah, I did say, sorry, living prime minister. Well, they had to, sorry, yes, I apologise. They had to put Margaret Thatcher in there, I suppose, don't they, as the benchmark popular Conservative prime minister. Yes, she is dead. Oh, yeah, she's definitely dead. They burnt her to ashes and then buried the ashes under stone. She's not coming back. I do have to keep pointing that out in case anyone's of a nervous disposition out there. Let's look at the next one then. So then the next ones are quite, is this the one I'm after? No, let's do this one first. They're both quite similar, but let's do this one first. I've got this one up. So again, this shows travel of movement from people's opinions. Last October, when he'd just been made prime minister, all people knew of him as his work as chancellor. And of course, bear in mind, a year ago, people would have naturally thought better of Rishi Sunak because he was replacing Liz Truss. Honestly, they could have made Michael Fabricant the prime minister and people would have gone, phew, at least it's not Liz Truss. So Rishi Sunak's, let's have a look here. Thinking about Rishi Sunak, do you think now this is net figures. So remember, this will be those who think he is or isn't one of these things. So is not a racist or is a racist. So there's 57 people, 57-point lead on people thinking, well, he's not a racist. That has gone down to 50, which you'd say is still reasonable, but again, likely to be for the fact that he keeps having to champion Suella Braverman's clearly racist policies. So that's gone down a bit. I think all of these have gone down, haven't they? They've all gone down. So actually, before we even go through the details again, on none of these measures has Rishi Sunak actually come in and said, and persuaded the public that he's better than they thought. He's not actually convinced them of anything. But let's go down. Is hardworking or lazy? So 53-point lead on hardworking. Like 40-point lead, still not bad. I will point that out. And to be fair, I think, hardworking doesn't always mean good, because hardworking, it's like, in whose interest is he working hard? Not ours. But he is hardworking, certainly compared to Boris Johnson. But it's still gone down. It's still gone down, and it's gone down a lot. Is kind or unkind? He had a 16-point lead there. He's got a 7-point lead now. A lead's still a lead. So there's still a lot of people who think he's ultimately kind. Not quite sure how, but, he's still got a lead there. But on all of the rest on this slide, anyway, really bad. Is competent or incompetent? So he had plus 28 on the old competency stakes. Now it's minus 12. I mean, how could you think otherwise when he hasn't? I mean, to be fair, he has got some things done. The Windsor framework, to be fair, was an actual achievement, even though it was basically just agreeing to what we agreed to several years before. But he had to get it through his party. Back in Horizon, again, same thing. It should have been a no-brainer, but he had to get it through his party. So those are achievements. If you want to talk about achievements, those are achievements. But in terms of domestic stuff, like ask the average member of the public, well, what do you think about the Windsor Framework? Do they even know what it is? They might have known what it was when it had, when the news was out, but did they know what it is anymore? Brian there, Sunak, wild delusions of adequacy. Yes, that is a problem, isn't it? Is likable or dislikable? He had an 8-point lead on likability. Now it's minus 16. So he's not likable, in terms of the general population. Admittedly, I will point out, this is the general population. What would be much more interesting to see would be, and they might have these, I haven't looked at the detailed data yet to see if they've published it, for 2019 Conservative voters. That would be interesting. But the fact that his people's opinion of it has gone down so much is still instructive. Is decisive or indecisive? He had plus 36-point lead on decisive. Now it's minus 19 indecisive. Again, how could you say otherwise? So many U-turns. He's proper Boris Johnson level of U-turns. There's been another one again this week. Honest or dishonest? Now, he already started in a bad position. He was on -1, but that's now gone down to -21. So he's not seen honestly. Now, that is a problem because despite everything, you do sort of have to be seen as honest, because when people are judging your manifesto, they're judging two things. First, well, three things, really. First, do they like what's in the manifesto? Now, if the answer is yes, there's still two questions voters have to ask of themselves. Do they believe that the party that's promising these things is going to deliver them? Well, at the moment, that would suggest actually a lot of people don't. The second thing is, are they competent to deliver it? That's where Labour fell down in 2019 on the competency stakes, not the honesty stakes, the competency stakes. But again, so he's -12 on competence and -21 on honesty. So basically, whatever Rishi Sunak presents in the manifesto, a majority of the public are not going to believe it. Is authentic or putting on an act? So again, -11. So the majority of people already felt he was putting on an act last year. But you know what? Politicians, I would say that about any politician, even ones I approve of. But that's gone down to -34. That's not a good sign. Is strong or weak? Apparently, he was +15. He looked strong a year ago. All right, then. But now he's -35. Again, couldn't be any other way, is it? You say maybe Nadim Zahawi can encourage even more damaging figures from YouGov if he benefit from a change in leader. All this nonsense, right? Nadim Zahawi has nothing to do with YouGov, sorry. Even when he founded it, which he's not in there anymore, but even when he was, he made it to make money for himself. It doesn't make money if it produces crap results. YouGov is one of the top pollsters. It doesn't have political interference, honestly. Charismatic or uncharismatic? He was never charismatic. I said this from the start. He tried to be. He's like, oh, look at me, Yorkshire tea. That's not charisma. So he started off on -10, and he's gone down to -38, right? So he's now officially less popular than his sock puppets. And then is in touch or out of touch with ordinary people. This should have been a warning sign for the Conservatives. He started off on -54. Of course he is, because after that, remember that leadership contest? It's not even just about the fact that he's super wealthy, right? That's obviously, difficult to come across. But then Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson's nowhere near as wealthy as Rishi Sunak. Same with Nigel Farage, but they're both multi-millionaires, right? And they both somehow came across to the general public as being one of them. You had people who sweep the streets for a living, who were thinking, oh yeah, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, they're just one of the lads, aren't they? So it is possible to come across as in touch. Rishi Sunak, just unbelievable. And part of that, I think, would have been last year, those two clips that came out. One of him as a young lad going, oh, I've got all these aristocrat friends, these upper class friends, working class. Oh, not working class, obviously. And then there was the one about where he talked about stealing money from deprived areas and giving it to affluent areas as Chancellor, boasting about it. Things like that won't have helped him. So he started off in a bad place. and it's gone down like minus 72. I cannot just imagine what these figures mean, right? So it's like, so what they're doing is they've asked people whether they think, in this case, out of touch or in touch, right? Some people have said in touch and some people have said out of touch. There'll be some people who said don't know, right? Some people in touch, some people out of touch. That minus 72 means that 72 more percent have said out of touch than in touch. So that means if 10% think that he's in touch, 82% must have said that he's out of touch. Now, I've not got the raw figures in front of me, so I don't know what it actually breaks down to, but that's what that means. It doesn't mean 72% think he's out of touch, which is still bad. It means, because some people will think he's in touch. Bafflingly, some people will think he's in touch. It might be 10%, which must mean 82% think out of touch. And then you'd have like 8% who don't know. There's also the Christmas video where he asked the homeless person who works in business. Yeah, I do feel a little sorry for him on that one because it wasn't actually as bad as being presented, but it's still, again, it just shows that he's really bad at presenting himself. There's a relevant missing question in that lot. Well, that's only half of it, so it may come up. Does Rishi frighten the gammon? Oh, okay, that was not in there. That is not in there. If we have a look at the sort of last one, let's move. Oh no, that's moving me. Right. So on the last one, how much, if at all, do you trust Rishi Sunak to make the right decisions on the following issues? So this is sort of about ongoing and future concerns. Again, everything is either backwards or the same. There's one that's on the same, dealing with Israel-Palestine, because they obviously didn't ask that a year ago because it wasn't a big issue a year ago. But on everything where it was also an issue a year ago, the direction of travel is very negative. You know, so dealing with the Russia-Ukraine conflict from +3 to -17, that's actually one I'll say is a little unfair because, you know, what's he supposed to do? Defense in general, -4 to -26. Well, to be fair, he has lost Ben Wallace and got Grant Shapps in place. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see whether that was a gradual decline or just in general. Obviously, lots of cuts in defense, but there's cuts everywhere. Dealing with the Israel-Palestine conflict, so he's not, obviously there's no travel there, but -30, that's not good. People aren't happy with how he's dealing with that. Again, I would argue that the way to deal with that for a British Prime Minister is dealing with the situation domestically, because we can't really do anything in the Middle East. We can help arrange more humanitarian aid. We can't tell Israel to stop. We can't tell Hamas to stop. We can't tell Iran to stop. You know, America can't even do any of those things. We certainly can't. But nonetheless, it's a disapproval that I wonder. Do you know what I wonder? If people didn't disapprove of so many other things associated with him, I wonder if that is a bit arbitrary. If maybe people thought he was getting everything else right, would that score be higher because people would be giving him the benefit of the doubt? I wonder that. But I wouldn't, you know, again, I'm just going to ignore that one. Managing the economy from +14, that meant people were broadly hopeful of what he'd be doing, to -31. And this is a huge problem. I keep pointing out, whenever Tories, or even some people who are a bit nervous on the Labour side or the anti-Tory side, are a little bit nervous and they think, oh, yo, but Ed Miliband, you know, Labour had a lead under Ed Miliband and then it all went away. And the thing I keep pointing out is that was in terms of voting intention. If you look under the bonnet, Labour under Ed Miliband never had a lead on the economy, and he never had a personal lead over David Cameron. So these things are really important. Rishi Sunak has never had a lead over Keir Starmer, and he's now well behind on the head-to-head. And on the economy, he is badly mistrusted. Johnny Copperhead, thank you. £10 super chat. Staunch Tory voters that I've talked to, even though they're being crucified financially by this government, seem fixated on all the asylum seekers flooding our streets, mad as hell. May depend where you come from. You know, those will be the sort of gammon conservative voters. There are the sort of conservative voters with a small c that are increasingly saying, do you know what? not just that they voted Conservative all their life. These are people who voted Conservative when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were in government. There's some of these people saying they'll vote Labour this time. So, which is a sign that not only is this Conservative government, or the last few years, not specifically Rishi Sunak's, is like the worst ever by far, but also, Labour have managed to detoxify themselves, which, a lot of it's down to Keir Starmer, obviously. But I will also say there are quite a lot of normally troublesome Labour MPs who are keeping their heads down as well, to be fair to them. Plus 14 to minus 31. Yeah, I mean, well, because like Rishi Sunak was billed as this competent pair of hands. Oh, he was the Chancellor. It's like, yeah, but the economy went down the toilet while he was Chancellor as well. Oh, it's because he was a banker. Yeah, he's the banker who's one of the bankers who started the banking crisis. Do you not remember that? But people don't know that. People don't know that Rishi Sunak was one of those investment bankers that basically created the crash in this country. He was a very junior member of the team, but he was still part of that team. Law and order from minus 12 to minus 36. That's another important Tory area. It's one that Labour always have to talk about, but it's a main Tory area. It's really for Conservative voters, that. And he's doing badly there. Education, minus 18 to minus 37. Well, do you know what? Schools are falling down. What do you expect? Britain leaving the EU. So on Brexit, minus 20. And again, these could be all sorts of people. These could be Remainers not happy that he's a Brexiteer. It could be Brexiteers not happy that he's not a hard enough Brexiteer. But he's nonetheless gone down in people's estimation there, minus 20 to minus 38. Climate change from minus 29 to minus 44. Of course, he's abandoned a load of climate pledges. The cost of living, minus 11 to minus 49. Now, that will be a reflection of how people are feeling the cost of living. And that should be worrying. Like, the Tories at the moment are focusing on inflation as if inflation is the be-all and end-all of everything, right? They're focusing on inflation, thinking, oh, when inflation's lower, people will love us again. It's like, look at this. Inflation's been going down this year. Not as much as they'd hoped, but it's been going down this year. But look at this. In the last year, and inflation is lower than it was this time last year. But this time last year, people thought that, they were generally not hopeful that Rishi Sunak would deal with the cost of living. It was minus 11, but it's gone down to minus 49. That means people think that the cost of living has gotten worse. Otherwise, he would have gained on that, or at least not lost. The fact that that's a huge shift. Minus 11 to minus 49, huge shift. That means, like, if, for example, there's 20% who think he's dealing with the cost of living as well as he can. If there were 20% who think that means there's 69% who think not. It's huge. And that is a reflection of the fact that even though inflation is coming down, people are feeling the cost of living more keenly. And that means even next year, that's not going to change. Their focus on the inflation is not going to help them. The NHS, minus 25 to minus 51. Of course, things are worse. Housing, minus 31 to minus 55. He's abandoned all his housing targets and he's U-turned on another housing policy again this week. And then immigration, minus 29 to minus 58. So even on their favourite culture war, I mean, they've not asked about trans rights here, but trans rights are not an issue for like even 1% of voters, which is why it's pointless pushing it. All you're doing is pissing. Like, I don't understand this trans culture war, because the only people who might conceivably use their general election vote on trans issues are the very people who would be most appalled by the Conservative stance on trans issues. It gains them nothing. Not even the most transphobic voter is going to use their general election vote, their vote that determines policies on everything, on trans issues. Makes no sense. Anyway, right. How's the comparison to Starmer going in the polls? I haven't got a graphic of those up, but I'll quickly look up the latest. But basically, it's not good news for Rishi Sunak. Should we put it that way? Let's go to the latest again. So on best prime minister, where is it? It's hiding here. Keir Starmer has a 9-point lead over Rishi Sunak. It was a 12-point lead recently, but that was the conference bounce, I think. So that's come down, you know. So Starmer and Labour got a conference bounce, the Tories didn't. Well, the bounce is deflating now, like it always does. But it's still, Starmer's got a 9-point lead over Sunak. I mean, it's really all there is to it. You know, it doesn't matter that neither of them are considered particularly charismatic. What matters to people, they know they're choosing one or the other. When people go to the vote, yes, there are people that use their general election vote in all sorts of ways, but the like 90% of voters in a general election use their vote to try and determine how they want the balance of parliament to be, which is, and for a lot of people, certainly 80%, I would say, it's about who they want in government. And they know that the prime minister after the election is either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Well, as things stand, unless they get rid of Rishi Sunak and spin the wheel of leaders again. Big difference between Sunak and Starmer. Sounds like an estate agent. Is only one is actually in a position to do out beyond talk. The fact he's doing bugger all is bye. Yeah, well, that's the issue, isn't it? Like Starmer has to try and persuade voters that his ideas will work without being able to prove it, because he's not in a position to prove it. This is why, you know, the job that Labour will have in government is fundamentally different to opposition, because then they're in a position to do something about it. Whereas Rishi Sunak and quite a lot of his cabinets, not just Sunak, they seem to have this attitude that they're in opposition now. You know, they keep complaining about things. We had at the weekend Tory MPs, some even ministers, even the Home Secretary, complaining about the way the police were dealing with a pro-Palestine demonstration. And it's like, well, who's in charge of the law and the police then? Huh? So they're behaving as if they're in opposition. In fact, so quite interestingly, someone who pops up a lot on my Twitter feed is Andrew Davies, the Welsh Conservative leader, right? Now, he is in opposition, but you look at the way he bellyaches, and then you look at the way cabinet, like members of the Westminster government, it's like the same thing. It's the same type of messaging. And yeah, it's the same, but it's like he's in opposition, he gets away with it, but you're in power. Why aren't you changing it then? And if you're saying, oh, this system's really terrible, it's like, well, who's been in power for the last 13 and a half years then? Who could have changed it? But there we go. Let's just have a look at a few more comments. I don't know where I'll be jumping in partway through a thread, though. That's the problem. Might need to correct my misunderstanding, but you'd expect gilt years to be higher in a crisis now because they're linked to gold prices. No, they're not. They are. It's just they go higher if you're struggling. If like what happens, like what happened under Liz Truss, for example, with the near run on the pound, is her mini budget was so mad that investors who are holding gilts, which are basically just bonds in sterling, pound sterling, they're thinking that the government might default on these. They're thinking that the government are pursuing an economic path that means that they, like, if you've got some bonds that say, oh, we promised to pay you out this much on this date, if you're thinking that they're going to default on it, it's not really worth much to you, so you try and sell it. So what was happening is investors were selling off these gilts, right? And they were just trying to get rid of them because they didn't think they were worth as much as they did. Because like if you're an investor, it's not just a case of whether you think something will give you a return, it's what gives you the best return. So if a government's currently pursuing mad economic policies, that's gonna impact their ability to pay, you know, to pay back. So what happens is the Bank of England then, to stop this crash, they have to increase the yield on the gilts to make them more attractive. It's like, oh, you know, if you keep them, we'll give you a bigger return. So gilt prices going up is absolutely linked to low investor confidence specifically in the pound, and which is very much linked to what they think is the likelihood that that government, or the Bank of England in this case, but that country, that central bank, will be able to pay you back. in however many years. So in order to be able to meet your your payments, you have to be making enough. You have to be bringing in enough in tax revenues to pay for all your public services, your essential public spending, and enough to service your debts, because that's what it is. It's the cost of servicing the debt. So that's effectively where it is for guilds. But we've sort of run out of time there. I'll just listen to this last comment from Wes. I thought of how Braverman sounds like she's in opposition. Very different approach to Rebecca, but Braverman does whinge. Yeah, because from her point of view, she is in opposition because she's the Home Secretary, but she's not allowed to do exactly what she wants to do, which is why some people fear that if Sunak falls, I would say the chance, by the way, of Rishi Sunak actually being deposed is quite low. You can't rule it out because, nutters. But I would suggest the fact that Suella Braverman could possibly replace him. The people who will fear Suella Braverman becoming Prime Minister most of all are probably Conservative MPs. So that is probably reason enough for Conservative MPs not to want to get rid of Sunak, despite the fact that certainly this slide that I left to last, which is the worst of the lot, this slide tells you that Rishi Sunak is leading them to a quite horrendous loss. And you think to yourself, well, if they're looking at it and thinking this is going to be absolutely terrible, isn't anyone better than this? Think back to Liz Truss. Tory MPs will be thinking of Liz Truss. It could have been worse. Rishi Sunak is still seen as better than Liz Truss. Their polling, as bad as it is still better than it was under Liz Truss. So if they're looking around thinking that Liz Truss might, who knows? Liz Truss could come back for another tilt. Boris Johnson wanted to, but Liz Truss could. She's still an MP, a Tory MP. And also, Suella Braverman's waiting in the wings. So if I were a Tory MP, even if I was a Tory MP convinced I was going to lose my seat, I would think, well, it can only get worse. Never mind, it can only get better. Someone should do a song for the Tories. It can only get worse, because it is just going to get worse for them now. But there we are anyway. Thanks for coming on. Don't forget to click the like button and to subscribe to the channel and to check out the details below in the description for details for Patreon. Have a great day, everyone. And until next time, I will see you later.